Hello, Rupert.
Hello, Maureen. That was very interesting. Thank you.
Well, I wasn't expecting necessarily to share a screen with you, but it's very nice to do so. How are you?
Very well. I'm supposed to go next, I think.
I think you are. Well, I mean, I don't know enough about you to introduce you, or I could give you a big, rallentando, da, 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 da. Please put your hands together, but I could do that anyway. Shall I give you an introduction?
And my family's very theatrical, so that was very interesting.
Well, that's very good. Ladies and gentlemen who are joining us tonight in this incredibly important vigil, which has been a great pleasure and privilege to be part of, I would like to introduce the next speaker this evening, the one, the only, the fabulous Rupert Slade. I think you're on that side of the screen.
My goodness, where do I start, Margaret? What a lovely introduction.
I'm going to try and get rid of myself. Take care, all the best. I'll go away now and leave you to it.
Thank you so much, Margaret. My name is Rupert Slade, and I am a Brit living in Hungary. I left the UK to travel and work in Eastern Europe as a media director back in 1998. And I've been there for 22 years, I suppose. I lived in Poland, I lived in Russia, and I had a 4-year interlude in Ireland. I see myself as a European. But my track is quite different to some people because I spent an awful lot of time in what is now the old Eastern Bloc, but in newer times. And I went to Poland in 1998, and I remember a slightly excruciating business meeting back in the in the mid noughties, when my international boss asked the guy who ran my Polish office, "What was communism like, Jacek?" And Jacek said, "Well, communism, let me think. It was a little bit like an open prison. We wore terrible clothes. We had really quite boring food. We had lots of free time. We spent a lot of time playing strange sort of games that didn't cost a lot of money, like chess and ping pong. And we learnt languages, but it was all really rather pointless because we couldn't go anywhere to use those languages." Now, what I find ironic is I've been reading a great writer recently, Anne Applebaum's latest book, where she talks about her time as an anti-communist activist. And she used to work with people like Simon Heffer and Daniel Hannan, these very same people who were trying to get rid of communism. And the biggest reason why communism fell is that people wanted to move. They wanted to see what the Western world looked like. They wanted to see what Western Europe looked like. They wanted to be liberated. And it's really, really ironic that these very same anti-communists are the same people who were behind the thinking in Brexit. It's also quite ironic that we're now in a real situation where we are suffering real freedom, lack of freedom of movement. We are living in COVID times, in lockdown times. This time, there's a real reason for it. I understand why governments are doing it. Some governments are being kind of less effective than others, and frankly, it's chaos in many places, but there's a real reason for it. But getting rid of freedom of movement is a bit like enforcing COVID on yourself. In Hungary these days, I worked in media for a long time. I tried to be a stand-up comedian, not particularly successfully. One of my dearest friends and most unlikely friends is a 26-year-old Sudanese guy who runs the English language comedy in Budapest. His passport looks exactly like mine, but it's Sudanese. It allows him to go to Angola, I think, and nowhere else. He would love to have the British passport, a passport that gives him license to live and be free in all these different places. Why on earth have we got this passport that is a key to freedom and the opportunity to live and travel and love in so many countries? Why are we giving that up? I do not understand it. I was born 56 years ago in 1965. And I was a child of the 70s, a time which for some reason many people are very nostalgic about at the moment. Now my memories are that of a young child through to a teenager, but all I kind of remember is really rubbish food, power cuts, the 3-day week, going to bed via candles, huge international debt, casual racism, and a rather grey, dull world. The most exciting thing we did in those days was go on a day trip to Boulogne and get 200 cigarettes and a bottle of whiskey. Those on the continent were different to us. It was them and us. At the age of 16 or 17, like every teenager, I wanted to express myself. I wanted freedom. And eventually my parents let me go interrailing at the age of 17. 3 years in a row I went interrailing. And it was a revelation because I suddenly realized that people all around the world, all over Europe, who were my age, wanted the same things. They wanted to get drunk. They wanted to go and find girls. They wanted to party. Yet they gave me something else. They gave me the best bits of them and I gave me the best bits of the UK, because at the very core of what the European idea is about is that cultural diversity enhances, it doesn't dilute. But in the minds of so many Brexiters, Europeanness, internationalism, and cultural diversity dilutes our culture. I just don't see that. The next big moment of my life is I moved to Poland in 1998 to run an advertising agency. And I went to a place that reminded me a little bit of my Putney 70s high street. There was an Irish pub. There was one Indian restaurant, one Italian restaurant, and there wasn't really very many places to go. And the culture in the office was very closed at first. But I had young, enthusiastic people who were dying to learn. They were living on their parents' sofa beds. They wanted the freedom. They were excited about being able to make a difference. I was rewarded beautifully 8 years later in a way that was very, very moving when I had my 40th birthday party, when 20 of them had the money and the desire and the wish to fly to London to come and join me on my 40th birthday party. And this was a place where 7 years ago, they lived in their mum and dad's sofa beds. Life had changed. They had been liberated. They had confidence and the energy and the excitement to be able to move and travel. And I went back to Poland to work again in 2013. And when I went back in 2013, it was a revelation. Everyone spoke English. Not that that's it's only one thing, but it's the idea that the service was extraordinary. The quality was extraordinary. It was the most dynamic place I'd been to. And so much of that is to do with the fact that people had been away and come back and learned how to communicate. It made me feel very proud. And the final element of being part of freedom of movement was for 5 years, between 2010 and 2015, I was the regional CEO of a media company, and I was traveling literally 2 times a week on an aeroplane. I was never at home. And I actually hated it. I was in bland, boring 4-star hotels, eating chicken sandwiches, watching second division football matches, eating and drinking slightly too much, not really living. And it was not, but it was the practicality of being able to go from an airport to airport, not having to stand in queues. There's something bizarrely strange. If someone turned around to you and said, you're going to get off the train when you get to Manchester and there's going to be a passport control, it would have just be killing. Passport control at railway stations. in the UK, to me, it is the same as getting rid of freedom of movement and not being able to travel freely from place to place. And it's interesting because back in the time of the railways had the same effect on people as globalization does now. Oh my goodness, someone's going to travel 100 miles on a railway train and try and take my job or undercut, the farmer in the village up the road. People are fearful of the speed of change, and it's quite reminiscent. When I went interrailing in 1982, I went to Ceausescu's Romania. I also went and worked in Moscow in 2007. And I love Russians and I love Romania. I go to Romania with my wife I've been there many times. It's a beautiful country with lovely, lovely people. But what was interesting is that you suddenly realize what freedom of movement being stopped looks like. It's putting a kind of crucifix up, which is very appropriate for Transylvania and Romania, and saying, under Ceausescu, we don't really want you here. We're going to rip you off. We don't trust you. Ceausescu's Romania was more expensive than Norway for a foreign tourist in 1982. It was costing more for me to stay in a room in Romania than it would in Norway. And they made you change money at the most ridiculously low exchange rate. Everything about it was, we don't like you. We don't think you're part of us. When I went to live in Moscow in 2007, they're not friends of the UK. I had to have an HIV test. It cost me 130 quid in Harley Street. Get to Romania, get to Russia. Sorry, this isn't valid. It's not from our Russian state system. All my luggage was stuck in customs for 2 months. Of course, Britain won't come like that tomorrow. It won't be anything like that. We won't be like my poor friend who is Sudanese, who has a valueless passport. But why are we going backwards? Wasn't the Berlin Wall the best moment of the last in my life politically? The Berlin Wall coming down, liberation and freedom. Oh, I think that's the end of my speech. Happy New Year, everybody. And I miss freedom of movement.